Welcome to Complexity Made Simple. My name is Paul Allen, and before we get into today's video, well, I'm just going to remind you the 3 books that are on sale. Drink tea and read the paper. If you're a green belt and a black belt and you want simple instruction on how to apply your skill, design of experiments for 21st century engineers, and finally, a statistical process control for small batch production. They are all available from lulu.com and the links are in the video below. Welcome to the latest video. My name is Paul Allen, and the subject of today's video, well, we're going back to the 7 wastes of lean, and in particular what we're going to do is we're going to allocate the 7 wastes of lean just to show that there are only 7 wastes. This video follows a LinkedIn post that I made a couple of days ago where I challenged people and I said, well, I keep seeing people talking about 8 wastes. It's nonsense. It really is. And the 8th waste in particular makes no sense from a lean perspective. And I'm making this video now. I'm going to allocate these 7 wastes to a theoretical process. If somebody can contact me with an 8th waste that makes sense in this perspective, I'm all for learning something new. Let's all learn how this process works properly. So I'm going to allocate these 7 wastes to a theoretical order, because that's what these wastes are about. They're about a customer order. We are following the customer order, and we are assessing what the waste actually is. All right, so let's go through and just create a little theoretical flow. We've got the customer, they contact the sales department, they send information to the planning department, they send information to the purchasing department, who send an order to the supplier. Raw material then arrives on site, and then first thing that happens, we store it off site because we've got too much material. Then we bring it on site to a store, and it goes to the press shop, goes to the press shop, it goes to the plating shop, it then goes to dispatch, and eventually it goes back to the customer. So there's a simple flow. Okay, so we got 7 wastes. Now if you can think of an 8th, a 9th, a 10th, I don't really care. Please just send me a message. Either send me a message on LinkedIn, send me a message on the bottom of the comments on this video. But if you can think of an 8th waste that makes sense here, I will be listening. So let's have a look. Customer sends in the order into sales. Now what's the first thing that happens? Well, sales are already working on something, so it's going to sit possibly in an email, possibly on a printer, etc. It's going to sit. What's the waste? Well, let's number these. I'll number them just to make it easy. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, and I can just put the numbers on the diagram. Okay, so comes in. What's the waste? It waits. It waits for action. because we've got to finish what we're doing. We don't work on an order the minute it comes in, okay? So it waits for sales to pick it up. So we see waiting. Then the sales department, they process it, but they process it in a big block. So what we get now, we get a situation where there is a block of sales orders. So when our sales order is actually punched into the computer, we have to wait again for the batch to be punched into the computer before we press go and we send all the information to planning. Okay, so what happens again? Well, really, we're waiting again. So in here, there's waiting because of a batching system. Then it arrives in planning. What do planning do? Well, they have a cycle. They only act on new information once a week. So on a Monday, they start the planning cycle. So this information was sent, maybe it was sent on a Wednesday. What will the order do? It'll sit for 4 days. What will it be doing? It'll be waiting. Sitting there, then it goes into planning. Let's say it goes into purchasing. Purchasing act upon it. But unfortunately, the raw material that we're going to buy is the purchase order is too expensive for the purchasing officer to enact himself. So what we have to do now is we have to wait while a senior manager signs the purchase order. What are we doing? We're over processing. So there's an over processing problem here. All right, so, and it goes off to the supplier. Supplier sends raw material in. Now, because there is a minimum order quantity, unfortunately, what do we get here? Well, we get this stuff. So when it arrives, we got unnecessary inventory because there's a minimum order quantity. I couldn't actually order the 100 pieces that I wanted. I had to order 500 pieces. So now what have we got? Unnecessary inventory. Then we have to bus it from the offsite store, because everybody's got offsite storage these days, because you've all gone and bought stuff from China. So there's an offsite store, comes on a lorry. What have we got? Here we go. What's happening to the product? We're transporting it. Then it sits in a store. What's it doing? It's waiting effectively. Yeah, so sits in a queue waiting to be used. By the way, the reason why I'm saying it's waiting and it's not inventory is because this store, the goods should only come when we need them. So it's on a work to list. So maybe we've asked for 10 items and the item is in a queue waiting to be processed. So therefore it's waiting, it's not inventory. Here it's inventory. We just had to buy too much of it. It's not in a queue at all. We've just got 4 times more than we actually need. So okay, it sits waiting for the press shop to pick it up. Then the press shop start working on it, and unfortunately they start making rejects. So now what waste have we got? Now we've got defects. Then it goes over to plating. They do the same thing. We get defects. Of course, in between pressing and plating, there's likely to be a delay because we're sitting in a queue again. Guess what we're doing? Number 4. What's happening to the order? Each time I'm doing this, I'm asking the question, what's happening to the customer's order? What's happening to the customer's order? And I'm assigning the waste to the customer's order, because the only thing we're in business to do is to process the order to the customer. So what have we got? Defects. Then we get to dispatch. Or maybe we might get a little bit of overproduction in pressing, maybe. So maybe the batch size might be too big. So again, we might have a minimum batch size. We only want 100, but maybe we have to make 1,000 because the setup time is particularly long. So there could be a bit of overproduction maybe in the press shop. Then we get to dispatch. What do? Well, goods arrive. They sit. Typically they're in a queue. We're waiting. Finally, we pack it, dispatch it, goes to the customer. What did we have? Did we have them all? Well, we had one, we had two. Now what we didn't have was too much motion. Motion would happen in particular where someone's working at a workstation, and what they're having to do is reach for the goods on the station, and maybe they're putting it into a finished assembly. And so motion, different to transport, motion is normally local. Now motion is the one waste that you could allocate it to the person, because normally you're looking at a person moving. However, just thinking subtly for a second, why is the person reaching? What are they reaching for? Well, they are reaching for the material. They're reaching for the parts to make the assembly go together. So again, for me, if you wanted to stop them reaching, what would you do? Well, you concentrate on the material and you bring the material closer to the point of activity. Yeah, so you get closer to the point of activity, close to the point where the value is added. So once again, although motion, we didn't have motion in my little example, although motion could be about people, you should still be thinking about raw material, because the position of the raw material is what makes people move around a lot and waste an awful lot of time. So motion wasn't on there. That's the one we didn't have. We had bucket loads of waiting. Most of what happens to a customer order is you stand in a queue. Sit in a queue. It's like going to the airport. What happens when you go to the airport? You just stand in a queue. Then you move, you can have a cup of coffee, you get up to go to security, and you stand in a queue. Then you go and sit through in the waiting area and you have a cup of coffee, then they call you to the plane. What happens? You stand in a queue. Yeah, so what happens to orders most of the time? The order's standing in a queue. Then we had a bit of overproduction, batch sizes, minimum order quantities. If I could give you any advice at all, if you're in manufacturing, if I could give you any advice at all, if you took away the minimum order quantities, man alive, you would make buckets of cash. That's one of the easiest things to do to get rid of waste. Get rid of the minimum order quantities. They're the stupidest thing going. So we had a bit of overproduction there because of minimum order quantity. We had over processing where we had to get 3 signatures in order to get a purchase order off the site because of the value on it. And finally, we had some defect areas. Now the 8th waste. I've seen it called this, human capital. Wasted ideas. Call it what you want. Tell me, where can I put that in this process? If you can tell me how to allocate wasted human capital to the flow of an order through your factory, I'm happy to hear the solution. Or indeed, if you can think of any other waste that I should allocate to this flow. But this is why there's only 7 wastes. I can't find a place for the 8th waste. Even if I put it on a list and said there's 8 of them, I'd only ever apply 7 of them because of that. So there's your challenge, folks. Any engineer, any lean specialist, anybody at all, I'm open to learning. Let's all learn. Yeah, so is it the 7 wastes or is it the 8 wastes? Either way, if you get rid of those wastes, you'll make pots and pots of cash, but you've got to know how to apply them to do that. The 7 lean wastes.